Let me introduce Dmitriy Oparin from Moscow State University. So he got his PhD in historical science from Moscow State University, and currently he works there as a senior lecturer at the Department of Ethnology at also the Moscow State University. He specializes in migration studies, spiritual or religious studies, if I can kind of summarize it that way. And he has conducted wonderful research in Moscow that you will hear about, but also he has conducted research for his PhD in Canada, as well as later on in Chukotka, Yamal, Irkutsk, Tomsk, and also in France, Germany, and Belgium among migrant communities, as if I got it right. But today we'll hear about Moscow and the Central Asian migrants, and not only. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming to Warsaw at such a short notice.
Thank you, Ivona, and good morning. Good morning, everybody. And I'm teaching at Moscow State University and also High School of Economics in Moscow. And I'm an anthropologist, and I'm focusing on anthropology of Islam, anthropology of migration, Muslim migrants in Moscow, in Central Russia, and in Western Siberia as well, in Yamal Peninsula Autonomous Okrug, Yamal Peninsula Autonomous Okrug, and Khan-Mansiysk district as well. So it's Western Siberia, which is oil and gas, and it is one of the top destinations for the migrants, and for domestic migrants, and for the international migrants as well. And I conduct fieldwork in other Siberian centers in Tomsk, Irkutsk, on Muslim migrants there, mostly from Central Asia. If you have any questions, if you don't get anything, so I can sometimes so I speak both languages, English and Russian obviously, and if it's something in English, maybe it will be sometimes easier to translate some notions into Russian. But you will tell me. So yeah, I conducted fieldwork for 2.5 years in Moscow among Central Asian migrants who are somehow engaged in Rukia Sharia. Rukia Sharia is ritual healing with Qu'ran. And part of this Rukia Sharia is expelling djinn. And I conducted my fieldwork with several mullahs, but I was working mostly with two mullahs, two Tajik mullahs. The majority of the mullahs who expel djinn in Moscow and as well as in Siberian centers are from Tajikistan, they're Tajik, or they're from Uzbekistan, from the part of Uzbekistan where the majority of the population is Tajik. And there was a nice article, paper, What is Spirit Possession, Defining, Comparing, and Explaining Possession Forms, written by Emma Coleman in Ethnos, and I agree with you that possession is not a thing to be explained, but a complex series of patterns of thinking and behavior. So it's not only possession itself, a very large, capacious phenomena. Exorcism, as a method of fighting it, is likewise a complex system of ideas and practices. And I don't consider exorcism sessions solely as a matter of ritual. I approach such acts as an integral part of a large-scale process of personal racialization, whose actors include the possessed and the mullah, as well as patient's relatives, his friend, and the relevant Muslim environment, not to mention God and jinn. And so it's a multi-actor practice, and many people, and not only people, but spirits as well, and the God are all engaged in this practice. So I would love to approach this practice, exorcism and possession, through the lenses of three classical, traditional anthropological notions. So it's morality, authority, and precarity. And and of course, when you conduct fieldwork among the migrants and when you conduct fieldwork among contemporary present Muslims, you encounter immediately with dichotomies, traditional classical dichotomies such as traditional modern Islam shirk, so like paganism, and superstitious scientific and religious everyday, sacred secular. But these dichotomies are traditional and classical dichotomies. But at the same time, they live not only in academic approaches, they function not only in academic approaches, not only in academic papers, but they function also in the everyday life of my informants and of the mullahs, of the patients. And there are constant talks about Islam and shirk. What is shirk? What is Islam? What is shamanism? What is Islam? It's not Muslim, it's not Islamic practice, or it's Islamic practice. Why is it Islamic? And so on. And who is shaman? And who is a real Muslim, and who is mullah, and morality, authority, and precarity. But you have to deconstruct these dichotomies as well, because these dichotomies, they don't work in real life. And when you see every individual case, every real individual case, you understand that many notions and many contradictory notions, they live with each other very well, and they combine with each other. They are combined with each other very well, secular and separate, everyday and religious, and so on. And there are many approaches to possession. There are many approaches to exorcism among the anthropologists and psychologists and historians as well, specialists in Islam, or not only in Islam, and in migration. And but I understood that the majority of the approaches were quite hidebound in my understanding. So I decided to take a look on possession and exorcism from different points of view. And there is a classical approach of Michael Jackson and his work Existential Anthropology, and recently published Anthropology and Existential Term, what is existential anthropology. And I think that it's existential anthropology in my case, in the case of possession and exorcism, with its attention to personal experience and the conceptualization of precarity and inexplicability seems to be the most appropriate theoretical basis. And one of the most appropriate theoretical bases. So I use the word morality here, and Lambeck is one of the most important specialists, Michael Lambeck, a Canadian anthropologist in anthropology of morality. But here I'm interested in another notion that he has invented probably, or he wrote about it. It's called underdeterminism. That could be translated into Russian like недоопределенность. So I think that underdeterminism, when something is not determined, and that in your real life, different cultural and historical and anthropological concepts, so the behavior of a person can't be determined by cultural concepts and historical concepts and anthropological concepts, and by some abstract factors, And so it means that the real life is very contradictory and unpredictable, and especially when you deal with crisis, especially when you deal with pain and tragedy, especially when you deal with possession, and the possessions that combine many different directions, approaches, and different cultural and historical and religious ideas and practices. And so there is also another notion that many anthropologists use: everyday Islam, everyday lived Islam. What's everyday lived Islam? The focus on the doubt. Yes, it's a focus of something on every day. It's a focus on and on the real personal experience and real personal interpretation of Muslim practices and personal perceptions. And it's obvious, it's very anthropological, but there are also critiques of this notion, everyday Islam. And like I think that Samuri Shilke, who works in Berlin, he is a specialist in Arabic countries and especially in Egypt, and he wrote a lot about everyday Islam, and he was criticized by Nadir Fernando and some other anthropologists because they saw the dichotomy between religious and everyday. What is everyday and what is religious? So you think that something that is religious is not everyday, and something that is everyday is not religious. So you don't have to make this, to construct these dichotomies. And so anyway, there is a discourse about everyday and everyday lived Islam, and discussion and discourse is always fruitful, and there are more and more academic papers based on different approaches, on Schilke's approach, on Nadir Fernando approach, and on other approaches. So yeah, there are several books that really, and ideas and papers that really influenced me. And the last one, Staying from the Straight Path, How Senses of Failure Invigorate Lived Religion. It's about Islam and Christianity as well. There are many articles, papers in this book, and it is really one of the first anthropological it's one of the first anthropological researchers that focuses on doubt in religion, and how doubt in religion, and how doubt in religion invigorates and provokes the religiosity, individual and personal religiosity as well. And I will talk about this more on the Muslim and migration examples. And so I'm focusing the focus of the research, how the possessed perceive their condition, how the mullahs and patients interpret the causes of it and their methods of getting rid of evil spirits. So how patients' religious interpretation of their misfortune correlates with their often positivist position and scientific medical ideas. And in which Muslim social, economic, cultural and legal contexts mullahs and their clients exist. And I'm really interested in the figure of mullah. Of course, I talked a lot with the patients, and I spent a lot of time with the patients. But mullah was a key to this field work. He was a key for me to this field work, and he introduced me to his patients. And I'm really interested in the figure of mullah and sources of his authority within the context of healing, his sacral and social capitals, and how he empowers his patients while curing them. And something about my fieldwork and methodology. as I told you, I worked mostly with two Tajik mullahs. Though I met some other mullahs, the majority of them were Tajik. But you can't like get acquainted and you can't be friends with like every mullah, so you have to choose to pick somebody you will be really attached, and he will, like I remember I started conducting this fieldwork 2.5 years ago, and I tried to approach him and I called him, and we talked first in the mosque, and then I called him and he didn't have time, and then he didn't have time, then he had time, and he was reluctant for the first time to talk with me, and then afterwards, like in a half year, he started calling me almost like every 2 days, and even when I'm busy, even when I'm not really so interested in expelling djinn again, he called me, and now like we are good friends, and he trusts me. He understands that I'm not from Facebook, that I'm not working for an intelligence service, that I'm not police, that I'm not migration police, that I'm interested in his practices and in his perceptions, but I'm interested in a different way, and I'm not a danger to him anymore. And but it takes time, it takes energy, and especially in this really very subtle and very vulnerable field as possession, exorcism, and Ruqya Sharia. And so the sessions, where the sessions are held everywhere, these possession sessions, exorcism sessions, or liturgy, or we can say it, they're held everywhere. They're held in the patient's apartments, but the majority of them live like in communal apartments. The majority of them live like 10 people in one apartment, 10 people in 2-room apartment, or 5 people in 2-room apartment. Anyway, it's overcrowded, and it is like all these socialist block houses where you can hear everything that are doing your neighbors. And that's why you can't expel djinn loudly reading Quranic texts, Quran loudly there. So sometimes djinn are expelled like in the markets, and very often in the cars, in patients' cars or in my car. And it was also very important for me. It was also very convenient and comfortable for me to provide my own car for exorcism sessions, and the patients were grateful, and the mullah is grateful, and like everybody is grateful, and I'm grateful as well, and happy to provide my car. So the space is one of the most important problems for migrants, and I think anybody who is engaged in migration studies understands that, like the space, what is this space for living, space for like the migrants, they can't bring their children and their wives, for example, from Central Asia, and one of the reasons is you have to rent an apartment, and a separate apartment. You can't live with your wife and your children and with other men in one 2-room apartment. You need to rent a 1-room apartment, minimum 1-room apartment, but you can't afford it, so the space, that's why your wife and your children are in Central Asia. The same as with food, entertainment, ritual, sex, anything. Like the space is one of the crucial notions for those who are engaged in migration studies. I think in Poland is the same. And so yeah, the sessions are held. The sessions are not held in the mosque because probably you know like ethnic composition of Russia, and you know like the second ethnic group in Russia after the Russians are the Tatars. And there are more than 5 million Tatars in Russia, and the majority of the Muslim elite in Central Russia and in Volga Russia and in Siberian Russia are the Tatars. Though the majority of those who go to the mosques are mostly Central Asians, North Caucasians, but less, and mostly there are Central Asian migrants. And there are always some controversy and contradictions between the Tatar imams, so-called official imams in the mosques, and Central Asian migrants. And so the mullahs, they are not allowed to conduct the rituals in the mosques. And sometimes they do it in the basement, but really with some permission of a guardian, and just because you manage to establish good contact with the guardian. But anyway, these rituals are not encouraged by the Tatar imams in Moscow mosques. It's a little bit different in Siberian centers, and I conducted fieldwork in Irkutsk. I just returned from Irkutsk, I did it in autumn, September and August. And there I got acquainted with the imam is a Tatar, and one of the most important person who is specializing in expelling djinn is Tajik. And he expels djinn in the mosque. He's allowed to do it. He expels djinn in a female basement, in a basement where the women are, but there are no women, and like women, they don't go to the mosque frequently, and if they go only for namaz, or only for Juma namaz, for Friday prayer. So anyway, so patience and session, and jinn. They are. I think that I don't have to explain who are the jinn. They're like spirits. There are people, human beings, angels, and jinn, and they are all created by God. And but that's interesting how jinn are depicted and visualized as well by my informants and by the mullahs and by the patients. So the jinn are sly. They're really. It's impossible to. They can't be deceived. They're themselves masters of deception, and so you can't. And they live. They're mighty. They're old, like 5,000 years, some of them, and they live in the parallel world. Like they live in the same world as the human beings. And there are Russian Jews, Jewish jinn, anybody, female, male, elders, children, those who speak French, or those who speak Arabic, or those who speak Russian language. So there is the same diversity as among us. And but they're invisible. And there is a good paper written on, I think, Morocco and Spain. In Morocco, it's very, very, very popular, all these possession and exorcism practices, and many anthropological research on possession and exorcism are held in Morocco. And there is a paper called jinn are like microbes. So you can't see them, but they exist. You can't see microbes, but they exist, obviously. So nobody doubts that they exist, but you can't see them. So the jinn is the same. And they're invisible, but that's really interesting how patients visualize the jinn. For example, there was a Tajik man who told me about his dreams, had dreams. And he had really some mythological dreams. He was a businessman, and he had different trading points, trading where he sold vegetables and fruits in Moscow. He was quite wealthy, and he said that he had a dream he is attacked by a black pig, black dog, and black bull, and they are so mighty, being black, and they are attacking him. And then he started inviting mullah, and this Tajik mullah started reading Qu'ran and started these exorcism sessions. And he said, and he told me the dynamic of his dreams and the dynamic of this, how he visualizes the evil, and this dynamic was like these animals became weak, scrawny, and thin and died, and they were like in some mud, and when so this is visualization, and there is another example. So a woman, she told me that she had an operation, surgical operation, surgery, and she was possessed, according to her and according to a mullah. And the mullah started reading Quran, and I'm asking like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And so this was, and I felt a glistening breeze and lightness. There where I have the suture from an operation, she had a short suture from an operation, she's struggling with cancer. It was as if the man was left behind this car, still sitting there. He seems as if he wanted to leave and let me go, but he wasn't an angry old man, not aggressive. Jinn can be different. These ones were Muslims probably. So she visualized the whole family. So there was the whole family sitting in her, and mullah started reading Quran and again and again and again, and in several weeks she had this visualization that this family left her. So these jinns are Muslims. But a man stayed, but he wasn't aggressive. He wants to leave, but he can't. Like he's stuck. And so the mullah will help him to leave her body. So this is her visualization of her pain as well. And it is so connected with medical and physical things, like suture is a frontier between jinn and between possession and freedom, between jinn and between the world of the jinn and the world of humans. Like if they want to live here, they have to cross this frontier, to cross this border, to cross this suture. And how you can be possessed, that's the most important thing. So very often it's a fright when you are afraid of something. When you feel fear, but when you feel vulnerable. And for example, there was a woman, Tajik woman, she worked in the Tajik restaurant, she was washing the dishes, and she broke some dishes, plates. Okay, like she broke some plates. And she was afraid, of course, like it was loud, and so this was the moment when she became possessed. This was the moment when the jinn entered her. And so anger as well, anger. So any radical emotion, even joy, even radical, extreme joy and happiness is dangerous, any radical emotion. But also one of the most important things is dhikr, so witchcraft, when you are bewitched, cursed by somebody. How you feel that you are possessed, you are starting worrying, you are confused, and you feel like emotional disorder, but at the same time you will feel a physical disorder. You can feel physical disorder and you go to the doctors and you have so many analyses, but the doctors, they don't give you the diagnosis, or they say like your analysis are great, everything is great, nothing is wrong with you, and he says no, I feel pain. So and the next step, what you're doing, you're going to the mullah, and mullah says you feel pain because you're possessed. And but one of the crucial points about possession is the fact that you have difficulties with religion. You can't hear azan, for example. You can't go to the mosque. You start, for example, vomiting, or you feel pain, or you feel fever, or you feel uncomfortable when somebody reads Quran, when you even come close to the mosque. So this is always like this, and how the mullah understands that a person is possessed. This is like when he starts reading Quran, the person becomes like crying, screaming, mourning, and etc. So one of the fundamental ideas which the mullahs drew the attention of both myself and their patients, is the dogma that everything in the world happens according to the divine will. So, according to Allah, according to God. Possession is a test sent by God, and deliverance from jinn is in His hands. At the very beginning of our collaboration with Mullah, he told me that you mustn't say I heal you. It's Allah who heals. All is done according to the will of Allah. So that's really important. And recently, he published in 2019 actually an article on God and on that there is not a lot of God in the anthropology of Islam. So that's really interesting because the anthropologists are not interested in God, but the majority of the interviews we conduct and with patients, with mullahs, with imams, they're all about God. They're all about different but we never write about God. We are interested in different practices. We are interested in Muslim-Muslim relations, Muslim-non-Muslim relations, but we are not interested in Muslim-God relations or God-jinn relations, and sometimes even with Muslim-jinn relations. We are not interested. We are interested only in the social sphere, and so somebody should be pointed on this, and I agree to some extent, but I'm not writing about God here as well. So I'm not interested in God in my research as well. So I do it as all other anthropologists do. Though I'm interested in jinn and in these evil spirits and how they connect with people, how they connect and establish ties with people. And Qu'ran and shamanism as well. So each of the mullahs I worked with prioritized the Qu'ran and his exorcism practices. And of course, there is a huge pluralism in different exorcism practices. And when I'm asking, it's shamanism, it sounds like shamanism to me. Everybody was so extremely insulted. And of course, nobody agreed that it's shamanism. But when I told some other mullahs about these mullahs' techniques, and they told, no, it's shamanism, it's not Muslim, you can't do it like this. So there is always discursive tradition, and there is always discussion about what's shirk. Shamanism is shirk, but shamanism isn't shirk, but anyway, shirk is a word that everybody uses. It could be translated like paganism, but it's not a very correct translation. It could be translated like shamanism, that's not a correct translation. So, but let's use shirk as this word. And for example, Stefania Pandolfa, actually one of the best books on exorcism, published in 2018, so recently, in the University of Chicago Press. Note of the South, she emphasizes the elusiveness of the difference between false and Islamic cures, and I agree. There's been a difference that needs to be continuously reaffirmed and rearticulated both in practice and discourse. So what is false and what is correct Islam, it's not up to me, of course, to decide, but I can see that there is pluralism in different approaches. So some mullahs say you can't talk to the jinn. Some mullahs say that you need to talk to the jinn. Some mullahs say that you can't talk to the jinn because you have to talk with the Quranic words only to him. You have to read Quranic ayats, surahs to the jinn. So you can't just you can't have an idle talk with him. You can't have a dialogue with him. There is no way you can persuade him with your own words. You can persuade him to leave the body of a human with God's words, with divine words. And so what else I wanted to tell you about? Probably purification. That's really important, and cleansing of Muslim practices. So every mullah, he emphasized and he he wanted me to pay attention that he is focusing only on Quran and only on Quranic texts, and that his practice is legitimate because it's like 100% Muslim. And what's really interesting that there is a good research of Yusuf Muslim Enneborg. He's from Sweden, and he's conducting research in London, in East London, among different migrants. And he says that Ruqya Sharia is becoming very, very popular there. And he says, why is it popular? Because it is becoming universal, void of historical or ethnic traditions, void of historical ethnic characteristics. So it's becoming a universal globalized trend, focused only on Quran. So, like pure Muslim practice. You can agree, you can like disagree, but anyway, that's also interesting approach towards possession and exorcism practices. So I talked a lot with imams, with different imams, so official imams, those who work in the mosques and those who are the Tatars, about exorcism and possession. So I wanted to understand what they think about it. And many imams were quite skeptical and suspicious about possession. But at the same time, they have the phone numbers of those mullah who expel djinn. And if like a Central Asian comes and says, I'm possessed, and Imam will say, I have a djinn, like Imam will say, so listen, probably it's your weakness. You are not possessed. Probably you want djinn to be responsible for your sins. Probably you want djinn to be responsible for everything bad you are doing and for your really difficult, complicated emotional condition. And but the Muslim, the Central Asian patient will say, no, I'm possessed. And so he gives a telephone of a Tajik mullah who expels jinn. So many imams throughout Russia have these contacts with Tajik mullahs who expel jinn. Then I met another imam who told me that he is interested in possession. He was really reluctant to believe in possession earlier. But then he saw with his own eyes, he said, like somebody came to the mosque and he was possessed and he started reading Quran and like he was relieved and he said, I believe it now. And he started he has a diary where he writes about all possession cases that he encounters in his mosque. There is an imam that has done even a map of a city, like 50 kilometers from Moscow to the south. There is a city with a mosque, and there is imam. He made a map with different spots that could be dangerous, that could be inhabited by the jinn. And according to the Muslims who come to his mosque, like the Muslim come to his mosque and say, I'm possessed, and he says, where do you live? And he says, I live in this place. And he says, okay, I see there are a lot of people from this area who are possessed. There was a cemetery here, and now it's a residential area on the cemetery. So this is the reason. So he's making a map of the city with different places, dangerous places. So there is pluralism of techniques of exorcism. There is a blurring bound between shirk and correct Islam, and lack of unity among various Muslim authorities. This practice is becoming institutionalized. Yes, thank you. even in Russian it's a difficult word. And so, for example, this is a center, Irkutsk healing center in London. It's not as institutionalized in Russia as in Western Europe and even in America, and so you can choose anything you want, like black magic, gene possession, evil eye, mental disorder, and there are people who will help you, and so even a reception, and I call them and they can write you, like say this, they can give you an appointment, etc. It's nearly the same in North Caucasus, I think. In Dagestan and Chechnya there are also centers for expelling djinn, etc. In Moscow, no. In Moscow, it's really much more chaotic, and there are different figures, different authoritative, very famous people who can expel djinn. So it's more personalized and less institutionalized. And it is also commercialized, so there are many things that can help you with the gene, but the main thing, of course, is Qu'ran and your devoted way of life, but there are many medicines and tablets, etc. So, what's really interesting is that I have never encountered any contradiction between medicine and possession, medicine and exorcism. I mean, according to my patients, all of my patients went to see the doctors, of course. All of my patients combine doctors with mullahs. They have different authoritative figures, different authorities, different authorities. And so this is so-called hybrid explanations of disease. So like medical explanation of a disease and a spiritual explanation of a disease. And of course there are hybrid methods of dealing with disease, of tackling it. And these hybrid explanations are accepted by the mullahs, and these hybrid explanations are accepted by the patients. By the patients as well. So, when talking about possessions, the mullahs and their patients, they always use medical vocabulary, diagnoses, symptoms, nervous system. For example, this is an extract of an interview with a Tajik guy who is possessed. You see, I have a chronic condition, хроническое заболевание. Chronic condition, and chronic condition means that a jinn has lived in his body for a long time. If a jinn has only just taken up residence, it is possible to expel it, but if it has been living there for 10-15 years, it will have totally occupied all the old DNA. So like the jinn occupied old DNA. It will be difficult because he's sitting there very comfortably, maybe with all his family sitting there too. So he won't live without a struggle. This is what the mullah explained to me. So morality, it is one of the crucial notions in exorcism, in expelling jinn, and in possession. And possession is never morally neutral. And the mullahs, they adhere to a very simple and understandable logic. So if you conduct a religious way of life, and if you're religious, if you're pious, so like you have some honor. But if you're possessed somehow, if you're bewitched, if you're cursed somehow, so if a jinn takes possession of an individual, so the mullah proposes intensification of religiosity. And I am using the word re-Islamization, and it's not a synonym of conversion at all. And it's a religious intensification, and it's situational, and it's a rethinking of patients' everyday religious life. So Islamization is not the fact that like they were not Muslims and they became Muslims after possession. No, it means that the possession provokes re-Islamization, possession provokes intensification of religiosity, and there is always before and after. Before possession, I was so like sinful, and I did not read Quran properly. I didn't go to the mosque, etc. Like before the age of 50 years, I lived as if I were blind, and then my eyes were open wide. Possession opened your eyes, and I asked if I could be given a chance. I believed that I had committed many sins. I began looking at the world differently. I read the book Qu'ran, which means Quran. And so sometimes possession could be, this re-Islamization takes historical forms, as people see an intensification of religious practices as their only solution. And I met an Uzbek guy who is possessed. He thinks that he's possessed, and he visits many mullahs, and in Uzbekistan and in Russia as well. But he can't get rid of possession, and he believes that he is gay and he's possessed by a gay jinn, and that's why this gay jinn doesn't let him to be religious Muslims, because there is a strong contradiction between like homosexuality and Islam in his ideas, and he has never told mullahs that he's gay. He says that he's possessed, and then he wrote a huge letter to the mullah, and he sent it to me, and coming out and telling him that he's possessed, but this possession is a gay possession, etc. And so there is a huge intensification of his religiosity. I observed it, and it's part of his interview with him. I have learned about 250 ayats from the Quran. I read to myself for 2-3 hours, and then I either lose consciousness or I choke and I can't go on reading. I have no inner freedom at all. I feel no fear for Allah and little love. Such thoughts come into my mind as if he had created me just to mock me. This damn thing is devouring me from the inside out. So I don't have. When have we started?
Well, like 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Yeah, I wanted. Okay. The normal practice, we will skip it. Yeah, one of the most important things that this re-Islamization and could be regarded as religious agency as well. Religious agency of the patients. And the imam, the mullah, is a guide, is a spiritual guide. He's a spiritual coach. He provokes this re-Islamization as well. Of course, everything depends on Allah. Everything depends on God. And your own healing depends on God as well. But it is mullah who provokes you, who encourages you, who guides you, and he's becoming this moral authoritative figure. And this one I decided to skip. So the second, to submit to a higher power is not therefore to forfeit one's own agency, but to recover it through a relationship with something beyond oneself, be this a supportive friend, a divinity, a diviner, or a material object. So that's really interesting how the patients are empowered, how they are gaining agency over their life, religious life, everyday life, how their everyday life is changing, and because of the authority of the mullah, who says them what to do, who guides them, who coaches them, and it was really interesting how many mullahs told me the same story about Imam Ahmad. So it's a quite famous story about Imam Ahmad, who was really very religious and very respected. And then there was a girl who was possessed by a jinn, and people came to Imam Ahmad and asked him to help her. And he said, "These are my sandals. Show my sandals to the jinn and they will go away." And these people came to this girl and showed the sandals. And so the jinn was so afraid, and they left immediately. Why? Because Imam Ahmad was so religious, so mighty, so respected, that the jinn, they respected him, and just the sandals was enough. Just the sandals were enough to obey him and to listen to his command. And so many mullahs, they love the story because this story is a great illustration of spiritual authority and religious authority. And that's really interesting how mullahs construct these social and sacral capitals, and how social and sacral capitals, they're interconnected. For example, this is, I don't take, as I told you, I don't take photos during my fieldwork, but I don't know why last winter I took many photos here in this place. It's out like suburbs, Moscow suburbs, and there are different apartments. Like nobody lives in these apartments. You can see that there is construction still. So in almost each apartment lives several like Tajik or Uzbek or Kyrgyz construction workers. And they live on the 14th floor, and they don't have a lift elevator. And like they have a lift elevator, but it's not functioning yet because the house is not functioning properly yet. And so we were invited to this mullah to expel jinn of a young boy. And so the mullah, firstly, he started reading Qu'ran on the water and on the olive oil, and then there was a young boy, like 18 years old, who was possessed, and he was really feeling bad, and this meant they were taking him because holding him because he was reluctant that he could run away, and the mullah started reading Qu'ran, and he didn't come the next day, and they asked him again and again, and I asked him, why are you not coming, like let's go and help Sam again. And he said, no, it's a filthy place, it's a dirty place, I have to care about myself, I have to care about my iman, my faith. So it's a dirty, filthy place because it's a construction site. It's non-human. It's inhuman now. And he decided not to do it. And I never saw him irritated, but I saw him irritated only when he meets with the possibility to make a mistake. For example, nikah is a wedding, like it's a Muslim wedding, and there came a Tajik guy and his fiancée, and so they asked mullah to read Quran, and he asked fiancée, do your parents know about this? She says, yes, they know. Could you call your father now and ask him for permission? And she said, no, I can't call father. And so mullah said, no, I will never do it. Dima, if I do it, he says, so I will lose my power, I will lose my iman, I will lose my faith, I will be dirty and corrupted. So I should be sure that this wedding and this nikah, like this, is correct and is according to Muslim norms. And that's why he invites his wife. His wife lives in Tajikistan. He has 4 children, and his wife lives in Tajikistan, and she's not Russian citizen, and she can stay in Russia only 3 months, and then she has to leave. And he invites her every half a year, because if a man does not have a physical sexual contact with a woman for more than half a year, so he loses his strength as well, and he starts thinking about, he had bad bad, dirty ideas and so that don't let him to be pious, don't let him to be devoted, don't let him to be a good Muslim as well. So like everything is interconnected with this self-care and morality and authority as well that is derived from morality. And so precarity is a different thing, and there are many papers in especially in Western countries and Scandinavia about the fact that the migrants, they very often could be Muslim migrants, could be possessed because they don't have normal access to the medical services, to hospitals, etc. So the mullahs, they cure them, and I think that it is very simplification. It is really wrong, and so of course migration affects differently. Migration destabilizes people. So migration makes people vulnerable, and you live in a constant precarity. Yeah, pretty honest, and so very often what I saw. Like a patient comes to the mullah and says like, I have pain here, I have pain here, I feel bad, I don't have good relations with my wife, I don't see my children, I can't find a job, etc. So there is a whole complex of stress, there is a whole complex of chaos. And mullah defines this chaos immediately. He says like, you're possessed, you have a jinn inside you, so this is the reason of all your misfortune. And what should you do? You should be religious, you should be pious, you should read 5 times a day namaz, you should try to avoid haram, and you should, so there is a diagnosis, definition, and a remedy. So at the same time, so that's really important, and that is what destroys or some this precarity, or somehow constructs your life and brings order into your life. And so there is so-called restoration of the symbolic order and destruction of uncertainty. So religion can bring order to this fragmented and chaotic everyday life. And very often mullah says that he doesn't want to read Qu'ran just for he says like somebody wants him and he says I'm possessed. He says okay, let's test, let's see whether possessed you are or not. And this person is not possessed. And mullah says you're not possessed, everything is okay, you just feel uncomfortable, probably emotional, etc. And mullah says they're so disappointed when I say them that they are not possessed. They want to be possessed, and they want me to solve their problems. They want to invite me every day. I can read Quran, I can take a lot of money, and every day, and I can say that you have thousands of jinn inside you, and like there is a catastrophe, and you are super possessed. But he can't lie. He's not like according to him. He can't lie. So people are in need for the definition of the crisis and chaos and emotional disorders they have. And if this definition is jinn, it's easier than that, like, probably something is wrong. And so, yeah, there is a last abstract from an interview. It's long, but I'm sorry, but it's really important. When there were a lot of people present on a holiday, he does not let me sit side by side with people who have a good imam, face, who are pious. He doesn't let me sit next to them, and he suffocates me. This has been going since childhood. I've thought about everything, and I realize that is something from my childhood. It can kill me. Fate decreed I would download Rukia and start listening to it. In Moscow, I don't go to the mosque. They have raids now. Everyone they catch gets deported. The police don't pay attention to documents. 400 people have already been deported, and I'm the only one in the family who is working, and I'm single-handedly support my wife children and parents, if I'm deported, it will be green. So what does it mean? It means that it's one of the first interviews with a Tajik taxi driver. The mullah went to the tea house after exorcism session in his car, and we stayed together, and he told me, so I did not cut, I did not edit, in several sentences, in several seconds, he told me about the fact that he is possessed, and jinn does not let him to be among good people, and at the same time he can't go to mosque because he is afraid of Moscow police, and he is afraid of this migration control. And I realized that that's really interesting. In my life, I'm like a Russian citizen. There is no migration control, Russian migration control, and I'm not afraid of Russian migration police. And at the same time, I'm not afraid about jinn. But these two entities, like migration police who deport people, and jinn, they're real for him, and they exert real influence on his everyday life. These two things, these two entities, these two enemies, they construct his everyday life and construct his religious everyday life. So he listens to Rukia Sharia in his iPad, but he can't go to mosque because he's afraid to be deported. And so he can't leave the car, it means. So he's driving, he's a taxi driver, and the BS, how they call this, road police, they're interested only in his driving documents. They're not interested in his migration documents. And so this is really, really interesting thing, and it made me think about ontology and ontological pluralism, and about jinn as real social actors, but it will be a huge simplification to think that only Muslim ideas and Muslim ontology is important to these people, and so to assume that the only Muslim ontology constructs the notions of those I spoke with, or Muslims in general. Of course, Islam is not the sole compass. It's not only Islam. And there is a good abstract from Samuel Shuka's paper about Egypt. In Egypt today, health, sickness, and healing in particular are the site of lively ontological pluralism. People searching for healing in times of illness make use of coexisting yet different ontologies. The molecular ontology of living medical therapies, which people are known to tend to trust more than some people in my social circles in Western Europe. The divine ontology of God's power over life, healing, and death, which motivates patients and their families to pray, sacrifice, call others to pray, consult spiritual healers, and act out of the virtues of patience and contentances with the will of God, and the ontology of humoral medicine in the traditional Hellenic and Islamic techniques of healing. So different ontologies. Of course, when you are in crisis, you have a lot of tools to deal with this crisis. And so I really wanted to demonstrate this ontological pluralism and of my informants, and even of mullahs who find themselves in difficult life situations and reformated their religious and other ideas and practices following a crisis experience. So really people have a huge arsenal of actualized ontologies, norms, ideas, and tactics at their disposal when it comes to overcoming a crisis. And these ontologies could be theoretically contradictory, but in each individual case, these ontologies marry each other very well. And also, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is again authority, and authority of the mullah. And the fact that of this authority is rooted in his social capital. He knows a lot of people, he is very respected, he has lived for more than 20 years in Moscow, etc. And he's called by them Sheikh, they call him Sheikh, and like everybody knows him. And at the same time, sacrum capital. He is devoted, he tries to be religious and disciplined, etc. And so he's a guide, and he provokes ethical discourse. And but this authority is shaped and maintained in the context of migration. And the political and economical vulnerability of the migrants, and precarity and lack of religious and social guidance in the context of destroyed family ties, social ties, reconstructed social ties. And so I think that it's not the possession that is provoked by migration, but the authority of the healer is constructed in migration, and it is a product of precarity and instability of migration. It's one of the recently I thought about it, and I decided to add it. I haven't published this paper yet. It's being published in a journal, Ethnicity, in English, and so I'm still in progress, and I still meet my mullah almost every week, and we still visit patients, and so it's not the end. It's not the end. Thank you for your patience.